All right, hello everyone. My name is Talan, and I'm serving as the University and Academic Affairs Commissioner for the LIT this year. And welcome to our newest project, in which we're interviewing the advisors from the Academic Advising and Registrar's Office. And today, our first guest is Dmitri. Welcome, Dmitri.
Thank you. So my name is Dmitri, and I'm one of the academic advisors at the Registrar's Office. Great to be here.
All right, so in this episode, we're mainly talking about the petitions. And my first question to you is, what is a petition?
Thanks. Great question. So a petition is a formal request to the Faculty of Arts and Science for an exception that is based on documented extenuating circumstances. So, for example, if you miss a final exam or you need to submit an assignment after the end of the term for documented extenuating circumstances, you'd submit a petition.
Right, thank you so much for that introduction. So, my next question is, how does the petitions and the petition system work?
That's a good question. So, there is an online petition system that students are able to initiate petitions through. So, students are more than able to log on to the Faculty of Arts and Sciences website, find the petitions page, and start a petition. But if students are not actually sure how to do that or what petition type to choose from based on their circumstances, then their first step should actually be to reach out to the academic advising and registrar's office, have a chat with an academic advisor, and we can start the process from there. Once a complete petition is submitted, so you need documentation to support your request and a personal statement speaking about what you're asking for. The petition is sent to our office for review. At that point, we'll work with you to make sure you answered all the relevant questions and you haven't left anything out. And then we will forward your petition to the Faculty of Arts and Science for formal approval.
Right, so as a follow up to that, I was just wondering from a student's point of view, when do you actually need to use the petition system? So, like, in what instances as a student do I have to submit a petition?
That's a good question. There are many different types of petitions and many different circumstances in which a student may want to submit a petition. The most common petition type is a deferred exam petition, and that is if a student misses a final exam. So, when I say final exam, I mean like a final exam scheduled by the Faculty of Arts and Science in the final exam period of a course. So, like December for a fall course, April for a full year or a winter course. If a student misses a final exam, they have to formally submit documentation to explain why they missed that final exam, and that is done through the petitions process.
Right, so could you maybe talk a little bit more about the course related petitions? So, I know for a fact that we have the termwork extensions or even on-CR NCRing a course.
Sure. So, term work extension is a really interesting example. So, if a student needs an extension on an assignment and they are able to submit that assignment during the course of the normal semester, no petitions actually required. Their instructors are able to grant extensions based on documented extenuating circumstances. But if something a bit more serious happens and a student needs to submit an assignment after the end of a semester, so for example, in a fall course, if they need to submit after December, or for a winter course after the end of April, at that point they could submit a petition to the Faculty of Arts and Science to extend the submission date of a specific piece of term work in a course. I would say for term work extension petitions, it's always a great idea to connect with an academic advisor first. Let's chat about your request and make sure that everything, we understand everything and it is the best course of action. But there are also petitions that are course related. For example, the one you mentioned, to the credit or credit petition. That's a really interesting one because so essentially it is a missed deadline petition. So it is if you miss the deadline to apply a credit no credit or to remove a credit no credit from a course because of documented extenuating circumstances. Typically, students will have to prove that they were incapacitated on the deadline. And that's another interesting petition that like you should really be talking to us first to make sure you meet the criteria and you have all the documentation. I will say the one exception is if you no credit a course that you need for a program, you actually don't have to submit a petition. That is just a request to our office. So that's why for that petition type, it's always really great to connect with our office first and have that conversation.
I do want to ask a clarification about specifically the NCRing option. So just to clarify, could you talk a little bit more about the cases where you're NCRing a course that's required for your program, but then you realize you can't really compensate for it and you really need that credit?
Sure. So if you have applied a credit no credit to a course, the deadline to remove that credit no credit, which is typically the last day of classes in that semester, has passed, but you realize for whatever reason, like say you switch programs and that course is now a requirement for your program, you can actually reach out to our office to request that that credit no credit can be removed. The reason for this request is courses that have credit no credit applied to them cannot be used to program requirements. So they can be used to degree requirements. They increase your credit count, but they don't apply to your program requirements. If you want to make that request, or if we are to approve that request, we have to see that the requirement listed in your program on Degree Explorer is incomplete. So even if the course could count, but you have another course counting to that requirement, for example, you would not qualify for removal. It is only in the case of an incomplete requirement. Once we do that verification, we will ask you to confirm that you need the course, that your program will not accept a credit no credit course, and that you understand that once that credit no credit is removed, the underlying grade will immediately count to your CGPA.
Right. So my next question is, how do late withdrawals work? Is this also a type of petition?
That's a really good question. In the Faculty of Arts and Science, we actually have two types of late withdrawal. So we actually have what we all will refer to as the LWD. LWD is a way that a student can withdraw late from a course after 2/3 of the course has been completed. So our normal drop date, so for example, for a winter course in winter 2025, the last day to drop a course without having it reflect on your transcript is March 10th. If you want to drop a course after March 10th, which is the 2/3 completion date, and before the last day of classes, you are able to request a late withdrawal from our office. Students in the Faculty of Arts and Science have 3 credits of late withdrawals that they can use over the course of their degree. And it's basically a no questions asked, you're able to withdraw late kind of situation. That being said, there actually is a late withdrawal petition that instead of having an LWD notation, you have a WDR notation. I will note these are functionally and in relation to your transcript the same thing. They are both indicators that a student has withdrawn from a course late. The WDR, or the petitioned late withdrawal, is in a case where a student, for documented extenuating circumstances beyond their control, was unable to engage in and complete a course. This is for circumstances typically that affect more than one course and were severe enough that students were not able to continue. The documentation threshold for this type of petition is quite high. And if you think you qualify, always reach out to our office for support first, and we can advise. But I do want to stress that the LWD, so late withdrawal that you can do through the registrar's office, or the late withdrawal petition on your transcript, are defined as the same thing. One is not better or more advantageous than the other.
So is there a fee associated with the petitions?
That is a fantastic question. There is a fee associated with one type of petition, and that is the exam-related petition. So if a student petitions for an exam deferral, for example, if that petition is granted, there will be a new sitting of that exam, and there is an administrative fee associated with administering a deferred exam. I will not quote the fee now because it may change in the future, but if your petition is approved and you have successfully deferred an exam, please read the decision very carefully. It will have payment information and deadlines. If you do not pay by the deadline, there's a big chance you can't write the deferred exam. So that is something to consider. But that is the only petition that has any sort of increased fee implications.
Right. So, what documentation is required for a petition?
That's a great question. It really depends on the circumstances that have led to the petition. A really common form of documentation that we see is the verification of student illness form, which should be signed by a medical professional. The vast majority of petitions that we get, as I mentioned earlier, are for deferred exams. Usually, students miss deferred exams due to illness, so a verification of student illness form signed by a licensed medical professional in Ontario or a doctor's note are typically what we ask for a petition. That being said, not all extenuating circumstances are medical. And I would say that what we look for in documentation is it should be independently verifiable. So objective, and if we need to reach out for additional context, we can. Every situation is different and unique. If you have questions about what supporting documents you should be providing for a petition, always reach out to our office, have a chat with an academic advisor, and we can advise based on your specific situation.
So, could students also use the absence declaration tool on Acorn when providing documentation for the petitions?
That's a really good question. So the absence declaration on Acorn is it's a one-time per semester tool that students can use to declare their absence, and in the term carries the same weight as any other approved forms of documentation. But the key thing about the absence declaration is it can actually only be used up to the last day of classes. Most petitions are for circumstances that happen outside of the term, which means the absence declaration actually is not an approved form of documentation for the petition. Because you can only use it up to the last day of class, for example, if you miss a final exam that is after the last day of classes, you would need external verifiable documentation, like the verification of illness form.
Great. So my next question is, could a student petition for an exception to their degree program or like, let's say, a degree requirement? I'm actually asking this because I had a similar situation on my own where I needed to take stats for both my computer science and my neuroscience degree, and there were different courses. And I was wondering if I could make the computer science statistics course count for my neuroscience requirement as well.
That's an interesting one. So I'll start with your example. So, can a student petition for an exception to a program requirement? Program requirements are actually outside of the purview of the petitions process. So the petitions process or petitions in general are typically like administrative remedies to, extenuating circumstances. Whereas program requirements tend to fall under the purview of the academics. If you have a situation like that where you want an exception to a requirement because you've taken a course that's an exclusion, or you might have like a large group of requirements in your program and you want to see if an additional course that's not listed may count, that's actually at the discretion of the academic department that's offering your program. A simple email to the department usually gets the job done. Some departments have more formal program requirement waiver processes in place, but all of that's actually initiated through the academic unit. If you have questions about that process or how that works, 100% come to the registrar's office, but it is not a formal petition. Technically, because your degree requirements are kind of purview of the Faculty of Arts and Science, an exception to a degree requirement is a petition, but those are rarely granted and only in really extreme cases.
Okay, so my last question for you today is, can I review my final exam paper if I think there was a mistake made, maybe when like calculating my final course grade, or let's say just specifically in my final exam? And if so, like how does this process and the timeline work?
So, simple answer to your question is yes, you can request to view your final exam. And this process is done through the Office of the Faculty Registrar. So, I mean, if you search for University of Toronto Faculty of Arts and Science final exam viewing in a search engine, you'll find all the information you need. I will note that there is a fee associated to these types of requests. And in terms of viewing, students can either attend a viewing or request an exam copy. But I will note some exams are what we refer to as restricted, which means you can't get a copy, so you would have to like book a slot and get a viewing. But I think if anyone is concerned about their final mark, given that most students will never see their final exam grade, attending a final exam viewing is really the first step. Um, students also have the ability to request a final course mark recheck. So that's not necessarily requesting a regrade of any individual assessment, but you're asking for a recalculation of your final course mark just to make sure everything was calculated correctly. If you do view your final exam and you realize there had been a mistake in marking, then you can formally, through the Faculty of Arts and Science, request for a final exam regrade, which will go back to your professor and your academic unit. In terms of timelines, typically you can request to view your final exam about 2 months after the final exam period. I know that seems like a really long time, but unfortunately, our internal processes kind of kick in at that point. So, first of all, obviously, your instructor has to mark the exam and submit the grades, and then they have to return the papers to the Faculty of Arts and Science. Faculty of Arts and Science has to catalog them before the viewing can start. I will say if you get a course grade and you're unhappy with it, that's a really good place to start. But if for whatever reason your dissatisfaction is a bit more urgent, always come have a chat with an academic advisor. Let's see what we can do.
Great. That was all of my questions for today. And thank you so much for giving such elaborate answers to all of them. And I guess to our students, if you have further questions, they can reach out to the Academic Advising and Registrar's Office. Thank you so much.
Yeah, anytime. Always reach out. So, how to get in touch with us? You can call our phone line, which is on our website during business hours. So Monday to Friday, 10 to 4. We close for lunch from 12:30 to 1:30. Or send us an email at uc.registrar@utoronto.ca.